Week 6, Unit 11, Exercise 1. In the study of human adaptability, the ecosystem is the total situation in which adaptability occurs. Because human populations have spread throughout the earth, this adaptability varies a great deal. A population in a specific ecosystem adjusts to environmental conditions in ways that reflect both present and past conditions. A desert population that has existed in that environment for several millennia will differ significantly in its response to desert conditions from a population that migrated there only in the past generation. A population that has existed longer in a particular environment is more likely than a recently settled population to have developed physiological and even genetic characteristics for coping with environmental constraints, such as hypoxia. The more recent inhabitants will have physiological and cultural adjustments attuned to another environment. Adjusting to the new environment may take several generations, and the final result may or may not resemble the adjustments of the original inhabitants. This is particularly true when native populations are available. The newcomers may borrow some of the practices of the original inhabitants in order to achieve a satisfactory adjustment to their new habitat. Exercise 2. We inhabit worlds that are not only full of possibility, but also foster a variety of possible selves. In using this concept, we should recognize the considerable constraints placed on realizing the possible and at times even being able to envision it. These limitations are on one hand physical and biological. For example, for as much as we would like to be able to fly, this is not possible given our anatomy and the gravity on Earth. Such constraints are transcended in our imagination and, indeed, visions of the physically impossible inspired generations across the centuries from the ancient Greek stories of Icarus to Leonardo da Vinci's sketches of flying machines. Ultimately, the impossible became at least partially possible, and humanity is capable today not only of traveling by air, but also of reaching outer space. But even more significant than physical constraints are the social and cultural ones, both imposed by others and self-imposed. These limitations placed on discovering and exploring the possible can be explicit, like in the case of living under harsh totalitarian governments, or implicit, exemplified by the pervasive power of discourses and social representations to shape our thinking without us realizing it. Exercise 3. Some researchers suggest that although successful performance leads to increased efficacy, subsequent levels of performance may decrease due to evaluation errors. More specifically, research has shown that overconfidence may impede performance due to the overestimation of the accuracy of one's knowledge. For example, highly confident individuals are found to overestimate the precision of their answers and thus underestimate the potential consequences of their decisions. This is particularly relevant for those who possess the power to impact many, such as executives, as the relationship between power and confidence is particularly relevant to understanding how overconfidence may impact executive decision-making. More specifically, it was found that the psychological experience of power is related to overconfidence in decision-making, which in turn may lead to adverse consequences for the organization and its environment. When individuals overrate the accuracy of their knowledge, there may be a negative impact on their performance and decision-making, especially in the case of highly influential people who are overconfident in their decision-making. Exercise 4. Modern philosophies, since the rise of evolutionary theory in the 19th century, have come to give change a more central place. They see constant change in the universe, in the animal world, in populations and social forms. Even the most abstract philosophies have begun to think more in terms of process and time and the flow of events, and less in terms of a fixed essence and a rational nature to the world and man. Modern practical attitudes reflect the actual change that a constantly revolutionized technology brings in human living. Unlike the medieval cathedral, built to last beyond the memories of men, a modern skyscraper is built to be replaced in due time. A home is not an ancestral dwelling, but a rapid construction that may not survive the last mortgage payment if you have not moved away by then. The number of people who live today in the house in which they were born is small, and the number of those who glory in the fact is smaller still. We simplify everything and turn to the latest model. Exercise 5 through 7. Mr. Jackson was so excited about a very special gift he had purchased for his 5-year-old son Ted. He had saved up his money and bought him a combination compact disc cassette tape player. He was sure his son had no idea what was in the package under the Christmas tree. Ted had asked for this, but had also told his father that he knew he could not afford to get it, and that was all right. 2 days before Christmas, Mr. Jackson realized that Ted did not have any CDs for the player. It would not be right to get a present for Ted that he would not be able to enjoy. So Mr. Jackson took the package from under the tree and took one final shopping trip to find some CDs Ted would like and that would fit in the player. Ted noticed that the package was missing and asked his father about its absence. Mr. Jackson came up with the perfect alibi. You see, son, Santa wanted to look at your present and bring you the perfect presents to go with what I was getting you. After he looked at it, he wrapped it up again in different wrapping paper and just gave it back to me when I returned home from shopping. Ted appeared to listen with wonder and delight as his father spun this outrageous tale. Mr. Jackson was very relieved to see his son's bright face. Later that night, Mr. Jackson was walking past his son's room. He noticed that Ted was kneeling beside his bed praying. Mr. Jackson was touched by the sight and peeked through the crack in the door and listened to his son's prayer. He prayed, "God, you know I already prayed to you once tonight, but I just have to say one more thing to you without Dad here. I don't know why he blamed Santa for swiping my CD player, but I just want to thank you for getting him to bring it back." Exercise 8. Simple organisms like bacteria use general algorithms built into their genomes to assess trends. For example, E. coli have algorithms that say it is wasteful to produce the enzymes for processing lactose when there isn't much lactose about. These rules have been installed in the organism's genome over millions of generations by natural selection, and have persisted because individuals that inherited this algorithm were more likely to survive and reproduce. But in order to know when to apply the rules, bacteria also need knowledge of what is going on right now. Are lactose levels rising or falling? Identifying trends requires sensors, but it also requires some form of memory so you can compare the situation now with the situation a moment ago. Indeed, it may be that memory exists primarily to enable future thinking. Recent neurological studies have shown that in organisms with nervous systems, memory and future thinking are handled by the same parts of the brain, which may explain why people who lose the ability to remember vividly also lose the ability to imagine alternative futures. Exercise 9. Despite the significant importance of marketplaces as the core of economic and socio-cultural transactions in the city, local authorities often tend to problematize them as unhygienic and unhealthy urban environments. Early examples of this situation were in the major European cities in the mid-19th century, where poverty, overpopulation, and pollution were the main problems in inner-city areas. For example, in London, street markets were a part of the vivid urban scene in the 19th century, supplying cheap food and products. However, they were unorganized and naturally growing. The city authorities have viewed these markets as components of the city's degraded living conditions. They introduced structural spatial changes to address this problem, including removing street markets and developing new and enlarged indoor marketplaces. These new indoor markets functioned as an urban renewal tool as well, as their construction required the demolition of existing building blocks and reorganization of streets. Exercise 10. It is interesting to note that out of all the species that have ever existed on the Earth, only one has had complex intelligence. One could argue that this is naturally the case, since only one species could be the first to develop intelligence, and the existence of that species might preclude another intelligent species from ever developing. This is a false argument, however. A better comparison comes about from noting that through the last few 100 million years, there have been a large number of species that might have evolved into intelligent creatures but did not. If intelligence is such a beneficial trait, allowing species to compete more effectively in its environment, then one might expect that many different species would develop intelligence. Birds have existed longer than mammals, and they did not develop intelligence. Dinosaurs reigned for over 100 million years, and there is no evidence to suggest that they might have developed intelligence. Out of all the species that might have developed intelligence, only one did. For all the species that have ever existed, the development of intelligence has been a sole event, suggesting that the presence of this trait is not necessarily essential for a species to compete better in its environment. Exercise 11. Among vertebrates, birds are among the most accomplished of architects. In some cases, as in several African weaver bird species, males alone build the nest and use the finished product to advertise for a female, and when one is willing to approach, she will examine it in detail and then decide whether to take the male as her partner. Weaver nests are not tied to branches, but free-hanging, intricate structures that have only a small opening. The male first has to pass the test regarding the quality of the nest site, and if she is satisfied, the partner comes as part of the package. The female behaves more like a tenant and does not even look at him, but will inspect the nest very thoroughly. Consideration is first and foremost given to the nest site and its quality and the territory where applicable. This may seem a little callous, but the fact that the male is able to build such a nest or have a good territory is a statement of desirable qualities, experience, and assets. Exercise 12 through 14. It was like any other normal day, sale day at the livestock barn. The sale was over, and all the livestock was gone with one final load to move. Willie Arthur had gotten his friend Tom started in transporting livestock about a year earlier, and whenever they met at barn sales, they would talk about the trips they had made. He had been transporting cows for many years without any out-of-the-ordinary events, but little did he know that this would turn out to be a trip he would never forget. With the help of Tom, he had loaded out and was headed to another sale barn in the neighboring state of Mississippi. About halfway into the trip, and a little tired, he decided to stop for coffee and a rest from driving. He pulled into a little cafe that was a usual stopping place along the trip. When he walked into the cafe, he noticed two young men laughing and talking loud like they might be just a little bit drunk, but he didn't think too much about it. He sat down at a table and ordered coffee while making conversation with a few locals. One was a deputy on duty that soon finished his coffee and started out the door. No one had paid much attention to the two young men that had just walked out of the cafe. The deputy noticed the gate open on the cattle trailer and hollered to Willie Arthur to tell him, and about that time, a cow came running by the door. He knew right off what had happened. The two young men had decided they would have some fun, so when they walked by the trailer, one of the men just opened the gate and let those cows out right there in the middle of town. Willie Arthur said it took till the middle of the next day for him and the police to get all those cows rounded up and loaded again. He went straight to a store and bought a chain and a lock. He said, "I bet that won't happen to me again."